Wonderful. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event this evening with us from Untangle and with Lizzie. We're talking about managing grief and supporting each other through. My name's Emma. You might have come across me before. I'm the community manager at Untangle. If you're new to Untangle, perhaps if you were referred here by a friend or you don't know much about us, we help anyone who's lost a loved one rebuild their life after loss, and we have practical and emotional help all in one place. I'll send you our link at the end if you haven't got that already, if you haven't got our app or joined our website. So really excited tonight to have Lizzie join us. So Lizzie is a motivational storyteller, public speaker, a consultant film producer and a podcaster. She often shares her own grief story and how she's learned to live well alongside her loss, how to navigate a new landscape and accommodating her grief into her life. With over 20 years experience investigating her own grief and the grief of others, tonight she'll share her grief toolkit and give us some great tips on ways of not only surviving but living well. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Lizzie.
Thanks, Emma. Welcome, everybody. I'm very aware that everybody here is in very different stages of grief. You've all got your own very different reasons for being here, and I'll be very mindful of that when I'm speaking. As Emma said, I'm 21 years on from my major bereavement, or my first and probably greatest major bereavement. As we all know, other things happen afterwards, don't they? We're not just exempt once we go through grief. So I'll touch on my own story, but what I hope will be helpful is if I talk about some of the things that I talk to my grief clients about, what they share with me. I worked at a children's hospice for 12 years and helped set up peer-to-peer support for bereaved parents. So I've learned a lot over the last 21 years, both personally and professionally. And I just hope that by sharing some of those insights, there might be a few things that resonate for you. I really hope that some of it does, and that some of it proves to be useful for you, whatever stage of grief you are in, or whether you're supporting someone else through grief. I hope it might be useful for that too. So 27 years ago, I was leading a very happy life. I was working in TV production and I really loved my work. I got married. I moved out from London to the Cotswolds and subsequently had my eldest son, Harry, and 17 months later, my second son, Cam. We were not suspicious that there was anything wrong with Harry at all. His health report when he was born said he was a vigorous and healthy baby. And we did what all new parents do when they get a health report like that. We breathed a huge sigh of relief that everything was okay and our worst nightmares hadn't been realized. But when Cam was 6 weeks old, a health visitor came to do a routine check on Cam, the 6 weeks check, and said that she didn't think Harry was weight bearing properly on his legs. And a week later, we were sent for tests at the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. And we were told as a result of those tests that Harry had an incurable, untreatable condition, a type of muscular dystrophy, a very acute type that meant he could live into adulthood. But as many of you probably know, adulthood often means 16 medically. So he had a life-shortening condition. And from that moment on, our lives changed dramatically. That was our curveball. And we were also told that all our children, male and female, had a 1 in 4 chance of having that condition. So we not only were facing the fact that Harry had the condition, but we were also facing the fact that we had to have our baby, our 6-week-old baby, tested as well. Thankfully, Cam was clear, but that was a very weird thing to be celebrating the life of one child and not the other, as you can imagine. Harry led a really amazing life for 6.5 years. We were so lucky. He was in a powered wheelchair, and we had to deal with 20 healthcare professionals at any one time. And I'm sure if any of you have been through a diagnosis like that, or been carers to somebody with a very challenging condition, you will know what that's like and how difficult it is. But he led a good life. He was a happy boy. He was a real cup half full person, and we were very lucky in that way. But sadly, he increasingly had chest problems. And in the year 2000, in November 2000, he got increasingly ill, and he died on the 17th of November. As many of you will have experienced, I don't think anything can prepare us, even though we know that somebody is very, very ill. I don't think anything can really prepare us for what major bereavement is like. And it was interesting. One of the first things I started doing was writing. I wrote diaries from a month before Harry died until about 7 years afterwards. And I didn't put pressure on myself. They were really just an account of what we were going through as a family. And I never expected to publish them. I wanted to record what my younger children were going through with their grief, so that if they ever wanted to read anything about it, and if they couldn't remember, I hoped that it would help them. And then I started to think maybe it would be useful for other people. And at the beginning, I called those journals A Grief Endured, because that's what my grief felt like at the beginning. It felt like I was enduring every minute, every hour, every day, as I'm sure many of you may be going through now or have been through. But 21 years on, with a different perspective, I've actually changed the title of it, and it's going to be published next spring. And it's now called When Grief Equals Love, a long-term perspective on living with loss. And since then, I've also interviewed 23 other people about their long-term perspectives on living with loss, because I really hope that that will be useful to people. I think there are a lot of grief books written in the first year of grief, and they're very valid and they're wonderful. And I'm sitting here in my office and absolutely surrounded by grief books. They're piled up high. My laptop's sitting in a pile, and I have them here. And I recommend my clients to a whole reading list of different grief books to suit whatever they're going through. And afterwards, Emma is going to share the reading list with you, I think by email. And I found that incredibly helpful. But what has helped me most over those 21 years, I think, has been reframing my grief as grief representing love. And when I called the book A Grief Endured, I was in so much pain that I couldn't really feel or see that. I couldn't look beyond any given minute. And I hope it's helpful to some of you who are in those deep throes of grief now to know that time has changed that. I don't believe that time heals in any way, and I don't see that as a negative. I don't know whether any of you have looked at the notion of continuing bonds, but that's the notion that we don't face closure with grief. We look at ways of connecting with the person who's died, and we look at ways of bringing their memories through into the present, which doesn't include them physically. And that was something that really, really helped me, that idea of continuing bonds, of connecting as much as I could with Harry in order to move forward. But that perspective of grief equaling love, I think, really only came incrementally and very slowly as we rebuilt our lives after Harry died. I found books so helpful because I felt it was helpful to share stories. I wanted to know, how do I survive this pain? How do I move forward with my grief? And by listening to the stories of others and by reading as much as I could, I felt that maybe with each book I read or listened to, I was just gradually unpicking my own grief, and certain things would resonate for me. And now these days, I help people back to work after major bereavement, because I'm sure a lot of you will have experienced the challenges of going back to work with grief when you're experiencing deep traumatic grief. And it can be so tough. And when I went to work in the children's hospice where Harry died, I changed my TV career and I had the opportunity to go and work on the fundraising team there. And I realized that that really connected me to Harry. It was an example of continuing bonds that just happened quite naturally by working there. And I started to hear the stories of people who were going back to work, of other bereaved parents who, like so many of us, had to go back to work for financial reasons, even though we might not have felt like it, but also sometimes wanted to go back to work for a sense of normality after bereavement. But yet what was challenging, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, was the fact that you go back to work and it's a different landscape. It's not the landscape that you left, and people don't always know how to speak to you. And there's a loneliness at work sometimes, as there is in the outside world, the non-bereaved world, where people don't always understand us and they want us to be better. They want time to have healed us so that they get the old us back. And I'm sure most of us know that that isn't really possible. And it's not always something we want. I mean, as a bereaved mum, I found it harder to say, I haven't seen my son for 6 days, and then 6 weeks, and then 6 months, then 6 years, and now it's 21 years, and I've no idea where that time's gone. But the notion of time healing is still alien to me, because how would I want to be healed from the death of my son? And I feel the same about the death of my parents. My mother died just the year before Harry. I want to be connected to them. I don't want time to heal, and I don't want closure. I don't want to put them all in a box and close the lid. I want to be as connected to them as possible. But I think that's a very difficult thing for people who aren't bereaved to always understand. And for me, it's been a way of, as healthily as possible, finding the connections that I can cope with and that I can live with, and taking them forward into the world in which I exist now. And I've found that comforting, but I've often found it quite hard to translate that to people who aren't bereaved and haven't been through it themselves. I think I was actually giving a grief guidance session just before I came on here. And one of the things that the person I was talking with was struggling with the most was the translating of their grief to other people. It can be really challenging, as I think we all know. So I often give talks to companies now, and then companies will help their staff by giving them grief guidance with me following the talk. And hopefully the talks I give in the workplace help to educate some of the people in companies where people are struggling with their grief. It hopefully helps to translate what they're going through and to make the workplace an easier place for them. And as all of us know, nobody's going to escape this. Everybody's going to go through bereavement at some stage. And I hope that some of the talks also help people who are supporting other people and will help to give them the courage to open up the conversations that we know are so difficult. So one of the things I found when I'm giving the talks in the workplace has been quite interesting, which has been that although I give a general guidance talk to people who aren't always bereaved people, but want to support others, I've found that in the workplace, a lot of the people that come forward afterwards wanting support because things in the talk have resonated for them are not always people who've been through bereavement through death, but also bereavement and loss through divorce and through diagnosis and through workplace change. And all of those are major losses at different times in our lives. And I truly believe in cumulative grief. I think so often with our peers and with our colleagues and with people we come across, maybe new people we meet, we don't always know what's gone before. And that can be really difficult.
Oh,
And cumulative grief is when we'll go through a major bereavement. Maybe for some people, that will be something that happened in childhood. Maybe you've been through the loss of a parent when you were a child. And then life goes on, and we can think that we've dealt with that loss as well as we possibly can. But then other things happen. Maybe we'll go through a relationship breakup. Maybe we'll go through divorce. Maybe we'll go through workplace change. Or maybe something will happen like an animal in our life will die. And we'll realize that cumulative grief, when it all piles up, can be a trigger for more things happening, for more grief, and we have to address it again. And the one thing I've really learned in the 21 years of bereavement is that I have to constantly address my grief. I had a lot of wonderful bereavement help from the Children's Hospice, from their bereavement team when my son died. And it was challenging facing it full on, but I'm really grateful that I had that help. But then other things happened in my life subsequently. And each time something else happened and the accumulation built up, I realized that I needed to keep on addressing it. And that's again where books have really helped me. I don't know, I'm just reaching for a book now. I don't know whether many of you have come across Edith Eger's work, Dr. Edith Eger, but she's written two fantastic books. The first one is The Choice, and these are in the reading list that will be sent through. And her second one was The Gift. And I find her totally inspirational because she's 94. She wrote both of those books in her 90s. And she's an Auschwitz survivor. She was in Auschwitz herself, and she came out of Auschwitz as a survivor with her sister in their teens, but both of their parents died in the concentration camp. And the reason I find her so inspirational is that she went to America. She didn't have any language. She ended up going to university. She made a new life for herself. But she has since become a psychologist, and she's dedicated her whole life to dealing with people with trauma and deep traumatic grief and helping them. But what she admits is that she still works on her own grief after all these years, constantly. And I would totally agree with that. And that's not meant to be a depressing thing. I just think it's something we need to be aware of, because the outside world likes to think that time will heal and that maybe after the first year we'll all be better and back to our old selves. But I think most of us know that that isn't the case and that we are changed. But life can still be good. I lead a happy life now, I would say. I enjoy my life. I absolutely love my work. And I'm very, very lucky to have two healthy surviving children who are now aged 23 and 26. But I live with my grief every day, and certain things will happen. It happened to me the other day. I looked for slightly too long at a photo of my son, and I found myself in pieces. And that's 21 years on. But mostly I can live very, very happily with the memories of him. I'm surrounded by photos here. There he is. And I live alongside his memory and alongside my loss over him. And I hope that's a positive thing for any of you in the early throes of grief. And I think what's happened over the years is that I've adapted to it. My life has grown around my grief very slowly, very incrementally, but nevertheless, my life has expanded around it. But I wouldn't say the size of my grief has changed. It's just that I've adapted to living with it. I was very, very lucky with the friends and the support that I had through Harry's life when I experienced anticipatory grief, which I think is what we experience when we live with a diagnosis. And then after his death, with the support that we received. But I'm sure many of you will have experienced that it's not always the friends we think will step up who are there for us. And sometimes it's the people we least expect to step up and be alongside us that are there. We get the surprises of the people that understand, and we get the massive letdown and disappointment of the people that don't, that we hoped would. And in a way, that's another type of loss, isn't it? You know, it's that landscape that we hope will unfold with the people in it that we love. But we have to find some acceptance that sometimes they just can't be there for us. And we have to find new ways. And that's where I think it is so helpful to be part of a forum like Untangle Grief. And there are so many others as well. You know, I'm sure you've found that there are very good forums and platforms through a lot of the charities associated with specific conditions. There's a lot of bereavement support out there through charities. A lot of it is free of charge. And we have to go out and investigate it because some of our friends won't be there for us. And personally, I tried not to let that be a reason to lose the friendships. But I think I very naturally sort of edited the friendships and the family who fell into different categories. And I think that's what we have to do. And it seems incredibly unfair when we're the bereaved person and we're going to have to do this work. It's so unfair. But nevertheless, it is very normal, I think, for that to happen. It's hurtful, but it's normal. And if we can sort of arrange the people into the categories that they sit in, you know, maybe one group of people are not the ones that stepped up. There's the unexpected ones. And then maybe there are the new people we meet through forums like this, who we didn't know before maybe, but who can become great people in our lives, our grief allies maybe, who can be there with us. Then that's a really good thing. And maybe some of the new people we come across who've experienced grief like us can be really helpful to us and can help us to stop resenting the people who don't understand quite so well. I don't know whether that makes sense to anyone, but we will do a Q&A in a while, and hopefully we can talk about some of these things. So do keep them in mind as we're going along. I think one of the big problems, as I'm sure you'll have experienced, is people just not knowing what to say. And this can be a real issue. And that's one of the reasons I started doing the Grief in the Workplace talks and going in and working with teams in people's workplaces and helping the teams around the bereaved person to try and understand what they've been through, what they're going through, and that this is for life, that they need support forevermore, not just 6 weeks of counselling in the first year of grief, which is what so many companies offer. And that's fantastic. But whenever I say to the head of HR in a company, what about after that? They don't often have an answer because there's a notion that that 6 weeks of counselling that's been offered is it. And are we supposed to be better then? Counselling and therapy are fantastic parts of a grief toolkit, but we need people to check in with us, don't we? Forevermore, really. And that's not a depressing thing. It's just that grief changes over time. And for me, I would say the early part of my grief, and we're all different, but for me, I felt a big shift after about 3 years. And that shocks people who aren't bereaved, because I think they think that we will be better after 1 year. And then I had another massive shift at 8 years. And I felt it was almost like gears changing, that I kind of moved up the gears. I was moving forward, then I'd come to a standstill. I might move down the gears again, and then I'd be moving forward, going up the gears again. And it's been like that ever since, really. But maybe the space in between the standstills or the slight setbacks has increased in a good way. I think at the beginning, I felt that grief felt like a bomb going off, and that it was up to me, the bereaved person, to go and find all the pieces. And those pieces were my friends, my family, all the relationships, because as you know, grief changes the dynamic, doesn't it? Within a friendship group, within family, within the workplace, there are so many dynamics that change. It's really tough going out and finding those pieces, and they don't all fit together back in the places they were, as we've touched on, with different people reacting in different ways. And it seems to me it's an added challenge to go and do that, but it's worth it. It's really worth us going and seeking the relationships that work well, and maybe just editing the ones that don't. I've had so many different things said to me, as I'm sure you have too, and I've found some of them have made me angry, some of them have made me really upset. I get where people are coming from, but it can be so challenging, can't it? I've had at least he's happy in heaven now, he's in a better place, whereas I felt, to be honest, there was no better place for my son than being with his family. I'm sure you'll have shared that too. I've had bad things happen to those who can cope. Really? Do they? Aren't we all just human beings, and terrible things happen to us, and we have absolutely no choice but to find a way forward? I personally felt that somebody who got it right, and I don't know whether you agree, but when the massacre happened in New Zealand and Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, said that brilliant phrase, we cannot know your grief, but we will walk beside you every step of the way. For me, that's it. That's what we need, isn't it, as bereaved people? We need people to walk beside us, not to walk in front of us necessarily, and not to walk behind us, and not to try and fix us. That is the most difficult thing, isn't it? I think, when people try and placate us and say things that they think will help. And it's often done from the kindness and the goodness of their heart, because they want us to be better. They care, and they genuinely want us to be better. But we're not going to be better. We're just going to be different. And in walking beside us and listening, that is, to me, the most powerful thing. And she summed that up so, so well. The other thing that I've really realized over the last 21 years is that grief shouldn't be competitive. As I said before, I think it can be accumulative, and it can incrementally pile up with other things that happen, and it can take us by surprise again. But I don't think it should be competitive. I've had a lot of people say to me, you've been through the worst thing, you've been through the death of a child. I don't think it is the worst thing. It's my worst thing. But for somebody else, it could be something very, very different. But to them, it is their worst thing that they've been through. And that's what we have to acknowledge. And I really see this in my workplace work, that people can judge each other. And somebody could go through the death of their cat or the death of their grandfather. And because the grandfather is older and it seems to be the right order of things, they won't get enough support. But we don't always know what's gone before. And we don't know that maybe that grandfather brought that person up because he was their significant human being, because maybe their parents died when they were young, or they were put into care. There are so many different scenarios. And when we meet people for the first time, we don't know what's happened to them. And it's really important that we don't judge, even as bereaved people. So I never think my child dying is the worst thing. I think we're all individuals, and it's whatever is the worst thing for us. I mean, I personally witnessed my daughter go through one of her worst things, and she'd been through the death of her brother. She'd been through her parents' divorce. Sadly, we grieve very, very differently. And after 26 years of marriage, we split up. And in the children's hospice world, 86% of parents do split up following the death of a child. But luckily, we've remained friends and we've worked through it together. But my daughter had been through all of those things, and through the death of her grandfather, who lived next door to us and who she was very, very close to. But when her cat died, that was the tsunami of grief that hit her. That was her trigger. It was her tipping point for allowing herself to grieve for everything that had gone before. And that, to me, really summed up why we mustn't judge. Because, you know, that could be somebody that we meet and we think it's only a cat. My partner's died, or my parent has died, or my child has died. But we just must try not to create this hierarchy of grief. We're all suffering in different ways. I do think crying is so important. And I know it's one of the issues why people are scared of talking to us about our grief, and why they avoid us, and why these relationships can fall apart. But I see it as the greatest honor if someone cries with me. I think it releases the tension from your body. I don't know whether you've read the book, The Body Holds the Score. And again, it's on the reading list, but Bessel van der Kolk's book. It's about how we need to let out that stress. And in bereavement, obviously, we can hold in an enormous amount of stress just by trying to function each day. And in early grief, the amount of energy we have to put in to holding ourselves together for other people is enormous. And so when somebody cries with me, I never think, oh no, I've made them cry, or I've upset them, or I've reminded them of their grief. I know all too well that we live with our grief every moment of every day. And actually, it's such a relief when somebody talks to us about it and we might cry. It's such a relief, and it's so important. I do believe that we're still somewhat living with the effects of the Second World War, where the soldiers who came back home were told, don't mention the war, don't tell anybody anything about what you've witnessed. And the people they loved, who they came home to, were told, don't mention the war, don't ask any questions. And in some ways, all these decades on, we're only just beginning to unpick that silence. And, you know, that again is what promotes people's fear about it. And in the workplace, I get a lot of HR teams and managers who are terrified they're going to sort of open a can of worms if they do the grief work. But of course they're not. They're going to be supporting people well. And they'll have staff who stay in their jobs and stay at work because they've been well supported, not people who leave their jobs because they want to go somewhere where nobody knows about their grief and they can hide it. And also, how stressful is that for somebody to have to hide it completely at work because they've changed jobs? It's so unfair. And actually, when companies support people well, they will see so much loyalty from their bereaved staff. They will witness the survivor's energy that can come when you're well supported. And the workplace will just be a much, much better place as a result. Now, I don't know whether many of you have suffered from the physical effects of grief, but that's a really big deal that I see so much with my grief clients, and I've experienced it personally too. So, so many people go for heart checkups, but a broken heart doesn't always show up on a heart scan. And it's such a real issue. We can have panic attacks. I had panic attacks in supermarkets for a couple of years after my son died. I was always so busy trying to hold in my grief and so fearful that I was going to break down in uncontrollable tears in the supermarket queue, that I wouldn't be able to get to the end. And a couple of times I had to leave the trolley and go and tell a member of staff in the supermarket that I couldn't pay and I was going to leave and apologize, because it took so much energy to just hold my grief in for half an hour in the early throes of grief. And that is a massive stress on the body. So we have to find ways of dealing with it. Now, the other physical effects are the lump in the throat. There are so many expressions that we live with and that we learn, but we don't always identify with. So the broken heart, the lump in the throat, the lung issues, the irony that when someone we love dies or has a difficult diagnosis, we often stop breathing properly. And therefore, we're not enabling oxygen to get to our vital organs, and we can become ill. I suffered from pneumonia for 4 years after my son died. I got pneumonia repeatedly over and over again. And I realized it was because I wasn't breathing properly and I was in a state of deep traumatic stress. These days, some of the things that have really helped me are I've started doing meditation. I meditate using meditation apps to get myself breathing, because even after 21 years, I can forget to breathe properly. So when you're in a high state of stress, using some of the meditation apps like Buddhify or Headspace, there are so many good ones and many of them are free. Even just doing 5 minutes of breathing exercises is so good. It resets your mind, it resets your body, and it busts some of that stress from grief out of you. The same with yoga. I do yoga online every morning before I get up. I do it in my pajamas in the mornings. And if I'm short of time, I do it for just 10 minutes. And in an ideal world, I try and do it for half an hour. But it sets me up for the day. And I wish that 21 years ago, somebody had told me to do these things, because they really, truly help. Therapy is obviously wonderful. And as I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure you know this, there are so many good charities and platforms where you can have help for free. Personally, I've tried so many different things. I've tried cranial sacrotherapy. I've had hypnotherapy to help me sleep. The best money I ever spent on just 2 sessions and coming away with a recording, I took to the hypnotherapist, please help me be more present. So I didn't actually take the issue of sleep, even though I wasn't sleeping a wink, because my mind was so busy worrying over the past, the future, everything. And so I thought, if I could be more present, all of that will stop and I will get more sleep. And that was right. And I have a recording from those 2 sessions, a tailor-made recording that I came away with. And to this day, if I start to get into a pattern of not sleeping, I use that same recording. So it was really great value for money, those 2 hypnotherapy sessions. The other thing that I've found helpful is making memory books. I found journaling really, really helpful. When we were talking earlier about whether time heals and time going on and it sometimes being more difficult, I think some of the reason for that is that we worry about losing the memories of the person who's died. And that's why time can be harder. But actually writing down and not putting any pressure on it having to be dated or, you know, not to be in any order at all, but just writing in a book when you feel like it can be so useful, because it helps to know that those memories aren't going. They're written down in a safe place and you can visit them. And with my grief clients in the workplace, so often they're working so hard in their jobs that they're worrying about not being able to access their grief or their memories. And so the panic can rise during a day with that energy that's going into not grieving. And so actually, if you've got a book that you can visit at the end of your day, or when you're in a safe place, or, you know, when I was having those panic attacks in the early days, if I'd known to do that in a more organized way, I think it would have really helped. And my grief clients say it helps massively, because as soon as they have those memories they don't want to lose, they write them down. And also photography, visiting photos and making, I know we all have lots of photos in drives and we have photos in albums from the past, but even every member of a family will grieve differently, and they will have had a different relationship with the person who's died. And so by making a memory book that includes bits of writing, it might include letters from the person, it might include photos that can be photographed on a mobile phone from printed photos. They come up really well if you print them in a photo book. Making a memory book of those things specific to you, not to the rest of your family, for you alone, for your relationship with that person, can be incredibly helpful. It's a tailor-made place to go and visit your grief when you need to. And I think it helps give you control over the rest of your time. And it can really help prevent some of those panic attacks, because you know you've got a place where you can go and visit it. I think community is massively important in grief. And as we touched on before, it's what can be lost through people walking in the wrong direction and not walking beside us. But places like this are so wonderful, the Untangle community. And really, I would go and find other places too. You know, we can have more than one option. And I'm still part of my son's condition with spinal muscular atrophy, and I'm still part of the community there online. And I join in, and although I've slightly crossed to the other side in that I'm a bereaved mum, I still join in that community of people who are living with my son's condition. I think fundraising can be massively important for people. And it's not just about raising money, it's about creating community, and it's about bringing people together around your bereavement or around your diagnosis. If you're ill and you're going through anticipatory grief and you're feeling alone because of a diagnosis, by supporting a charity that is close to you or was close to the person who's died, it gives you a way of translating your grief. It gives you an option of maybe around an anniversary or a birthday, bringing together some of those people. And they may include some of the people that you feel have walked away, who are a bit distant because they don't understand. Sometimes by explaining where you are at the moment with your grief, what you're going through, whether it's a year on, 2 years on, 10 years on, it doesn't matter. For me, we did quite a lot at 20 years on. We always do something to honor my son's anniversary and his birthday. And that has changed through the years. And as a family, we've chosen what we do. But by sometimes opening that up to other people and sending an email, a WhatsApp or a text to some of the people who have walked away, it can be really helpful. And at the very least, even if they don't engage with it, it can help you to feel that you have tried to explain where you are now with what's going on in your life. So I do see fundraising as being, apart from the positive thing of raising money, it's a really useful tool. I think that's it, probably. I mean, I have felt that my grief has changed a lot over the years. It's changed almost in a seasonal way, but I can cope with it well nowadays. I have my toolkit of things that I know help. And for some people, those things might be very different to mine. But I try and help my grief clients find what will be useful to them as I get to know them. And I think that's really what we all need to do. I'll finish before we open up for a Q&A with a quote from Einstein, who said, "Adversity introduces you to the real you." And I do think that's true. And I think it's what a lot of people can't cope with in the outside world. You know, maybe as bereaved people, we are on a different path now. We're working out what we want to do with the rest of our lives. And if you're going through a diagnosis and you're ill, it's a huge loss of the future you expected. And again, you're working out what you want to do with the rest of your life if that life is shortened. And that can be really challenging for the people around us who don't understand. But it can also result in a big drive and energy that does set you apart as you gradually work through your grief. Because as we all know, life is way too short. And when you face that adversity through a major life change, whatever it is, it's an opportunity to reset and work out who you want in your life and how you want to live it. And it is so important that we do that. So that Einstein quote really resonated with me. I hope some of the things I've shared might have resonated for some of you this evening. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to share? I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Oh, I'd like to share, because when you were talking about the talks that you do in the workplace, I think that is really, really good, because I had a really hard day yesterday. My mum passed away 6 weeks ago.
Oh, I'm so
So, and her funeral was just 2 weeks ago, excuse me. And I went back to work. I mean, she passed away on a Friday, and, you know, we were at the hospital with her for a few days. So I thought, okay, let's have a rest at the weekend, and then back on Monday, go into work. And I actually did go and do that. But someone said to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I was like, and then I just broke down, and literally I had to go home. And then I work in a school, so then there was the Easter break, and then, you know, Mum was funerals on the 25th, which was the day after her birthday last month. And I went to work the following day after the funeral, but it was strange because with the funeral, I was so happy. I thought, she's laid to rest now. I'm fine. Let me just get on with my life. And I went back to work, and, you know, I've had my ups and downs. I've hidden away in the toilet, cried my eyes out, come back out, you know, and just put on a big smile again. But yesterday, I had to do, well, I'm due to do my first aid training again. And I was fine leading up to it. Okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. So the first part you do online, and then the following day you go, you know, face to face. So I was at the computer yesterday, just getting started with this thing. They're talking about your breathing and the response and, you know, clear area for danger. I just had all these images of when I was in the ambulance with Mum. "Oh, are you okay, Yvonne? You know, just do this if you can hit." And it was just all coming back to life again. It was talking about the breathing. And because we were at the hospital with Mum, you know, until she passed away, I just pictured her breathing deteriorating along the way. I just broke down, you know, quietly crying, and I went away 15 minutes. I tried to have a break and come back again. Someone asked me, "How's it going?" I was just, I calmed down. I went back to try and do it. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And, you know, one of my colleagues said, you know, went to the head and said, you know, Michelle, she's not doing well with this, da, 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 da. So I went and spoke to her afterwards. And I just feel like there's a sort of, like you said there, you know, you're going to be better after however many weeks or however months. This workplace seems to think that's how it is. And I just feel like I've gone back to work and it's like everything's fine again. She's all right. Let's get back into that. And it's like, no, I'm not okay. And I couldn't handle it. And I went to speak to her. And, you know, I was talking about it. She said, oh, is it because you don't think you'll be able to get the certificate at the end? And you don't think you could, you know, manage to do what's being up? And I'm like, it's nothing to do with that. It's just making me relive what goes on. So I think in the workplace, it's, you know, it's so important for, you know, employers to have sort of some sort of understanding, you know, like in a school, they'd have the pastoral care for your children and things. They should have that in the workplace as well.
Absolutely. And I try and I advise companies and schools and health authorities over their grief guidance provision. So there needs to be somewhere on everybody's website or intranet or whatever. There needs to be resources listed there. And, you know, I think a lot of the things that help are for you, Michelle, to have your sort of grief toolkit that you can, including possibly trying to explain what you're going through to other staff. You know, maybe you can find a way of writing that or messaging them to help them to understand. And sometimes that could be through finding a good article about grief and sending it to them and saying, I just thought this really resonates with me. This is what I've been going through. This really demonstrates what I'm going through. And I thought I'd share it with you because it would be useful for you to understand. So it doesn't always have to be your words, because that can be too challenging. But if you can find a good article in the resources that we're going to share, that Emma's going to share afterwards, there are some links to podcasts, and there are some links, in fact, Edith Egger's TED Talk, which is just 15 minutes. You know, sometimes sharing something like that's short, or just an article, can be so good to translate how you're feeling to other people if they don't have good grief resources.
Understand.
Yeah. It's a terrible notion that I was talking to a client yesterday whose daughter died at 17 and just dropped down dead of a heart attack. And that was in October. And he was slightly beating himself up at not being in a great state and actually probably feeling a bit worse all these months on, you know, and I really tried to give him perspective, saying, you know, you are doing so well. You're moving forward gradually with your grief. But of course, it's only months since this happened. You're going to be in deep traumatic shock, as you are now, Michelle. You know, it's a huge, even if we've been prepared by an illness that we knew what the result was going to be, nothing can prepare us for the reality, I don't believe. And so that deep traumatic shock can go on for weeks and months. And that's where we need to really search for what is going to help us. I mean, you are also courageous turning up on this call today. You really are. And that's part of it. You know, hopefully this will form part of your grief toolkit. You'll go to other talks. There are really, I'm sure Untangle or probably already have all this, but the Good Grief Trust have fantastic resources, written resources, and signposting. And you can go into their website and search for a specific type of death or relationship and find the free counselling associated with that. And there are good resources out there, but I think sometimes we don't always know where they are.
They are, yeah.
Useful to have Untangled and things like the Good Grief Trust, you know, and just go and look at many different places. I think a grief toolkit consists of many different things.
Different things, yeah.
And over the years, you gradually add to them, and some of them will really give you huge relief. Sometimes even having one person, and only one person in your community that truly understands. If you know anybody that's been through a similar grief to yours, and if you don't, you may be able to find them through a bereavement charity, but sometimes having even one person that has walked a similar path, that can be so helpful, and it can help to reduce the stress over the people that don't understand.
Yeah. And it's funny you said about things that you can actually post for them to read. When I was on the website yesterday, somebody posted, I'll read it. It says, people think that I have survived your death. What they don't understand is that I have to relearn how to survive each day, because each day you are still gone. And I thought, if anybody comes at me at work today, I'm just going to say, why don't you have a read of that? And you'll understand that I am relearning how to survive now and be at work and do things that I used to do, without a second thought. But now, like, I wasn't expecting this first stage to trigger me off yesterday, but it did, and I had to say that, this first aid is about saving people's lives. I'm like, but my mum's not, her life is gone now. It can't be saved anymore.
That's very triggering and totally understandable. It really is. It really is. And as you have these traumatic thoughts, they will change over the weeks, months, and years, but you just have to be very kind to yourself, because it's such early days. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have anything they want to offer? Or?
Yes, I've got some thoughts.
Yeah.
Lizzie, interesting talk, very good. Well, my wife died 6 months ago, and I find that my best times are the times when I'm not thinking about her, which is not very often. But whenever I think about her, whenever I've thoughts about her, whenever I think about what we did together, it just makes me sad. Yeah. And it just brings it all back, the fact that she's not here anymore. I mean, we had a good marriage. We could have had another 20 years, but she died of an infection in hospital after an operation, which was a totally pointless death. And I feel that I would be better off if I could have some sort of memory wipe, if I could have all the memories of my wife taken away. Yeah. And then I wouldn't be sad.
Yes.
I'd be happy then.
Brian, I really understand that. When my father died, his partner, who I loved very, very much, she was suffering from Alzheimer's, and I witnessed that her grief was not the same as everybody else's, because she didn't have the memory. Literally the next day she'd forgotten how it happened. And I had a sort of envy of her at the time, because I thought, gosh, I wish, not that I would wish that on anybody, but I was very aware that because she had memory loss, actually she didn't suffer grief in the same way. And that thought went through my head. And I think, Brian, that's where some of these resources are useful, because it is what they do. I think, I don't know, with things like using meditation and just going on a computer, and even YouTube has lots of different short meditations. When you're feeling highly stressed through the overwhelm of constantly reliving the memories, by listening to a voice talking you through slowing down your breathing and calming and going through a meditation, it can really help, because it is doing exactly that. It's giving your heart and your body and a brain respite from the pain of grief. And that is how it works. And it's incredibly helpful. And if you're somebody that's never done that before, it can seem a bit sort of woo-woo and a bit, I don't know, a bit different, but it works. I can't tell you how helpful it is. It's such a gift to just switch off. And I think also you know, if you don't feel like reading, sometimes listening on one of the platforms to books or listening to podcasts can be really helpful as well in the same way, because it switches your mind into listening to something. You're not having overwhelm of too much information, but listening is so powerful. I mean, I didn't sleep for a long time after my son died. And, you know, now I've got that under control gradually over the years, but it's so natural that it's all you can think of. And so finding ways of giving your mind and body a rest from your grief by diverting the attention into something else can be really, really useful. It's challenging because it's hard to switch off from it, but it is a huge help, because very gradually and incrementally you may find that the huge stress and trauma is just easing a little bit in certain incremental ways, because you're diverting this attention into other things. It's, you know, it just takes a lot of time for that to gradually work, but it's worth trying to do it, to give your mind a break. It's exhausting otherwise, isn't it?
I could try that, yes. I mean, I do get out a lot. I've joined a lot of walking groups.
That's brilliant.
Meeting a lot of people. It's worse when I'm on my own.
Yeah, of course. And that's where I think, you know, I've spent a lot of time on my own with my grief. And I think, you know, that's where listening to a book, particularly, I don't know whether you find this, but meal times can be so lonely, can't they? You know, preparing food and then sitting on your own at a table where the person's missing, all those sorts of things. Whereas if you're listening to a podcast or listening to a book, and it may be a book that is totally unrelated to grief, it could be some really good fiction. But the trouble with television and with watching something is you need to be looking at it, and then you've got to get up and prepare your food or do whatever you've got to do on your own. And by listening to a really good book, you might be quite gripped by it. It's taking you away from your own situation, but you can prepare your food and you can sit at the table. I'll often sit at the table and listen to a book because I'm enjoying it so much. But unlike television, I don't have to look at it as well. And again, it diverts your attention, and that can be really helpful. You know, it's a good tool to have when you are having to do things on your own and at home. Obviously, that's when we all really face the reality. We can do all we can with friends and to go out and meet people, but at the end of the day, you've still got to close that door, haven't you, and be with your memories. And so, you know, I really highly recommend doing something like listening to a book. I know the radio's there, but the radio can throw up things that are not appropriate to our grief. So actually having control over something like a podcast or a book is really useful, because you can choose what it is that you're listening to.
I'll try that.
Oh, good. Anyone else? Thank you, Brian.
Okay.
Irene's got her hand up.
Might be some things in the chat as well, are there?
I have a question if there's any room for that.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I found it really helpful, really useful when you mentioned about relationships and friendships. I lost my dad last year unexpectedly, and I found him, and I'm looking after my mom now, and there were some friends who stepped up, who, yeah, I expected it and they did, and yeah, really, yeah, they kind of, it was like, yeah. And then there's one particular childhood friend who I felt so incredibly let down by. I was her bridesmaid, I'm one of the godparents to her kids, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I've just felt like she hasn't given a monkeys at all. I know that's not true. I know, and I know that it will be her own lack.
Yeah.
But she's a GP. We've known each other since I was 8 and she's 9. So it's not like she doesn't know what I'm like. She's even commented and said, "Oh, you will always feel things more deeply than I ever do." You know, that's one of the differences between us. But I think you've got kids of your own now, and they're gonna present with unedited emotions. Are you just gonna fob them off like I feel like you're just gonna somehow dismiss it, suppress it? How are you gonna, how will you address their expression of emotion? And I thought, I suppose I thought I don't know. I'm not quite sure the point I'm trying to make. I think I'm just wondering where, I don't know where to put that friendship anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know where it goes.
It's really tough.
You're exactly right. There are some people who just like, yep, expected them to step up, and they absolutely did. People who kind of like turned up from nowhere. It was like, oh wow, gosh, I didn't expect that lovely expression. Thanks very much. And then there were, and this one particular friend, I thought, this isn't just, I haven't just like fallen over and broken my leg or bruised my knee. This is my dad, for heaven's sakes. You've known him all, since you were 9. It's not a nobody. It's not an incidental. It's not even a bad breakup. Not that you've particularly been there to support me for that.
I think it's so tough, Irene, and it happens so often. And I think it is about organizing those friendships. I think it's probably paying more attention for now to the people who did step up, who clearly understand, and maybe just handling that friendship with care, however hurtful that is, not eliminating them. But where you find an opportunity, try and translate your grief to them where you can. That's where sometimes sending an article or sending something that's really resonated for you can help. Translate. You shouldn't have to translate to them, but the truth is that we are all wired differently. If it's any help at all, and I'm really sorry if this offends people in the medical profession that might be on this call, but I do a lot of talks to doctors and to the medical world. And I recently did a podcast and interview to clinicians in America. And I am always absolutely gobsmacked at the naive questions that I'm often asked by the medical profession, who have joined to cure people. And they often see death as a failure. And they really struggle with what to say to people when someone has just died, to the families. And they all admit it's their worst nightmare. How do you talk to bereaved people? And so, I don't know whether that's comforting at all, but I really see that so much globally. It's a big issue. And often, thank heaven for the medical profession. I have received so much incredible professional care, but they do have to protect themselves from what they witness. And so often can become very clinical and to have quite a big armor around them. And so they're not always the best people at being there for us as grieving people. Mostly they've set out to cure people, and we are challenging for them. So I'm not letting your friend off the hook, but I have witnessed quite a lot of that in the medical world. And I think it's a case of translating where you can, and then also putting some friendships on pause, let's say, just while you reach out to the people who are going to offer you solace. And they may be the unexpected ones, but they'll be really good.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps a little. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go, but is everybody, is there anyone else that had a question they really wanted to ask? I'm very happy to be contacted afterwards by email if there's a question that I didn't answer. And that
I was hoping to just ask something.
Go
Sorry,
for
I just had I have my hand up for a bit while Irene was talking. I lost my dad about 12 months ago, just had the anniversary. And he was ill for a very short period of time. And before he died, he knew my mum had got various memory problems, and obviously they don't go away. And with 4 siblings, and we all lived a distance from them. And obviously we adhere, well, 2 of us are healthcare professionals, and we all adhere to all the rules. We were, sorry, not that I'm going there, but you know, we didn't see them that often. But I know there were issues with mum and memory that had started 12 months before. Obviously, when Dad died, he was very much sort of the stronger one of the 2, always had been like mum and dad to us. My mum had lost her mum when she was 2 months old, so there was all sorts of issues of sort of bonding and things. And mum got very sort of lost without dad. Simple things in the house which he would have done. We all lived away, all struggled with sort of listening to her in tears on the phone, managing. I then as an OT, I then was finishing a job, and so between us I said that look, I'll help look after her for a few months, and let's see if we can get her in some direction. Anyway, the long and the short of it, we managed to get her rehoused into some supported living, and which is great, and it's the best thing, and I'll do it again to make sure that she's in the right safe place. But we're still going through the end of memory clinic, so we've got possibly, you know, we've definitely got some dementia. I know just from my health experience, but dementia, we've got grief, we've got lots of different thoughts from different siblings going through things at different times. We've had anniversaries, we've done ashes, we're now sort of going through the house stuff. I'm trying to get myself back on my feet after getting mum sort of rehoused and putting my life on pause. But I'm just curious about if you've got, I know it's very different, there's no recipes, there's no solutions, but about how different siblings deal with grief, because obviously we've got one lot of grief, but I've also got anticipatory grief coming with what's going to happen with mum and diagnosis, but also sort of from a practical point of view about where, I don't know, family members and how they grieve in different ways. Or I know it's a huge thing, but siblings and the way that we're all at. I've got a sister who fires off WhatsApps at the drop of a hat, really sort of mindless stuff, where thankfully myself and my 2 brothers are in a very similar vein, but I'm just finding it all very difficult because we're all treading on eggshells, and it's just so hard to from my perspective just to try and move forward, and try and be sensitive, but also then try and get your voice heard and deal with your emotion, catch up with your grief and life.
It's incredibly hard, isn't it? And I see this so much in families where everybody's wired differently. You may have the similar DNA, but you're wired differently. You have a different relationship with the person who's died or the person who's ill. The dynamic changes so dramatically, doesn't it? And I think sometimes it's a case of being incredibly honest with each other, where you can get together and talk about it and talk about the challenges. Have you read Julia Samuel's most recent book, which is called Every Family Has a Story? I would really recommend that you all listen or read that, because it could give you some really good talking points, because it's exactly about that. It's about the generational issues. It's about how different family dynamics work. And she's basically amalgamated a lot of different case studies of people she's worked with over the years as a psychotherapist dealing in grief and trauma. And that it's absolutely brilliant. I listened to it and it was really helpful. So that's something I'd very much recommend. And also she's been interviewed quite a lot about it. So maybe that you could find an interview on a podcast with her talking about that book, or on YouTube. that really makes some sense about your own family situation. And you know, again, it's an excuse to send it to the family and say, can we get together and talk about this? I mean, it's interesting. I was on a grief retreat this weekend facilitating for bereaved parents, and one of the exercises we did with them, that we had a wonderful theatre director doing written word with them, and she asked everybody to write down a list of things that reminded them of the person who died. And in any one family, you could do that exercise in a room together, and you'll find that everybody's list is entirely different because they had that different relationship. I mean, you can do group sessions. You could do a group grief session as a family, and it would be really helpful for it to come out, you know, the different way you're all grieving. It's about giving each other space to describe what you're going through. And I know that's really challenging because some families are in such a difficult space that it's impossible to get everybody in the room together or on a Zoom together. But it's certainly something that is better addressed if you can. And again, I think through finding things that resonate for you, it can help translate it to the rest of your family and invite them to do the same. And honoring the person, trying to focus forward, maybe with some fundraising, with sharing some articles, with any of the things that might help you all to focus on what you're going through together rather than apart. But also family therapy can be really, really helpful and very valid in a situation like this when everyone's experiencing it differently. It is so normal for that to happen, but it's very challenging.
But everybody's got to want to do it, haven't they? We can't even get my sister engaged on a Zoom about anything at the moment, you know. So this is what I'm struggling with, and so we just get WhatsApps, and which is not helpful. You know, it's sort of flight of ideas keep coming through, but no sensible communication. But sorry, that's probably too much information.
I think you have to protect yourself from that, and really look at the things you can deal with. I'm not religious personally, but I do think the words of the Serenity Prayer are really useful. You know, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And my mum used to say to me, say that in any given situation. And it may be that you can't change your sister, and in which case it's about how do you come up with a solution for best dealing with her that protects you, but without maybe totally alienating. But that's the sort of thing that good counselling or therapy would help you to know how to deal with. It's impossible on a quick call like this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I appreciate there's the family stuff is. I will definitely have a look at that for that book and those sort of
any articles or radio interviews about her. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining today. Thank you, Emma, for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone. Sorry that we overran, but I think I speak for us all when that say that was really, really helpful. So yeah, thanks so much for coming, Lizzie. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for giving up your time this evening to spend with us. I'm going to pop the link to Untangle in the chat in case you haven't signed up for our website or our app yet. If you do, then we'll have your email address and then we can send over Lizzie's resource that she sent to me with all these links for books and podcasts and everything. But yeah, apart from that, have a lovely evening and hopefully see you at an event again soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.